Family. First of all, how is my audio? Is audio good? Hopefully, audio is better. Okay, this is attempt number 2. How are we doing now? We doing a little bit better? Good, good, good. We're back. Okay, fantastic. Visuals good, sound is good. Amazing. Perfect. We have liftoff. There is a lot to go over. Somebody said, "How am I?" I'm doing very good. Like my daughter, my 4-year-old has an ability to just kind of like when she has a cold, she just coughs into your spirit, right? We're trying to teach her like cover your mouth when you cough, but she just waits for like the opportune moment, like when you're yawning, she'll just and it just goes everywhere. So my wife got sick. Uh, and it skipped me. I don't know how this happens, right? Whenever I do get sick, I'm only sick for like a day, but it's like terrible. But it just skipped me this time. My wife and daughter got sick with the cold, and yeah, I don't quarantine. I'm just not that kind of person. Like if my daughter is sick, I'm still gonna snuggle my daughter. If my wife is sick, I'm still gonna hug my wife. I'm still gonna be near them. But it just it just skipped me. So yeah, I was fine. They're doing great. Um, Yes, absolutely. Apples and milk kept me healthy, Ro. Yes, I appreciate it. For sure. Yeah, I don't get that sick. How's everybody doing? We have we have some stuff to cover. Absolutely, for sure. Guys, thank you for being here. Sorry for the last time. As I mentioned before, my wife and daughter got sick. They're better now, and so now I'm not on errand duty. Eating better now, sleep is still a 3. Okay. Progress. Guys, I'm going to run down a recap of chapter 3 before we get into chapter 4. All right? Biscuiteers unite. So, for a recap of chapter 3, we start out with kind of dreams of the past, right? Winston dreams of his mother and sister who died so that he could survive, right? This kind of stirs up guilt and the sense that personal loyalty means absolutely nothing where he lives, right? Personal loyalty has just been completely given up for political loyalty. And let me know if you feel me on that, right? I mean, because George Orwell is nothing if not prophetic with the work that he did here. We can kind of feel that this is the way that our culture is turning. It's like everything is politicized. Everything is politicized, right? And so Winston has this dream, where his sister and mother died so that he could survive, and that sense of personal responsibility to them. Next, I want to return us to this idea of the golden country, right? So Winston dreams of this pastoral, free landscape where Julia throws off her clothes in an act of rebellion, symbolizing the purity of desire, kind of untouched by party control, right? And what was amazing about that part of the dream is that he went from at first fantasizing about sexually assaulting her and murdering her to now not even being sexually interested in her, but more interested in her moral integrity. So this is the degree to which Winston is kind of skyrocketing in his trajectory for growth, for personal growth and development, right? Uh, Next, we have the thought police. So remember, Winston wakes up with this dread certainty that even his private thoughts aren't safe, right? Control reaches into the unconscious through dreams and through memory. And next, there's the party's kind of control of history. So he realizes that the party's real power is not just over the present, but over memory itself. And we're going to get deep into that in chapter 4. It's like whoever controls the past controls the future. And lastly, there's reality versus sanity, right? So Winston questions whether reality exists outside the mind and whether sanity is even possible if the majority believes lies. This seeds kind of the terrifying idea that truth itself is fragile, right? So when we go into chapter 4, if we're ready, throw me some apples and milk. If we're ready to get right into it. With the deep unconscious sigh, which not even the nearness of the telescreen could prevent him from uttering when his day's work started, Winston pulled the speak right toward him, blew the dust from its mouthpiece, and put on his spectacles. Then he unrolled and clipped together 4 small cylinders of paper, which had already flopped out of the pneumatic tube on the right hand side of his desk. So I love this. We're immediately getting a snapshot of Winston's daily grind, and it's very bleak. So his microphone is literally covered in dust, right? So guys, imagine if every time I went live, you saw like a mound of dust on my microphone that I had to like blow off, and you saw like little dust particles floating around my office. You would you'd be like, "Biscuit, what are you doing? Like, are you okay? Are your breathing conditions? Do we need to call somebody?" Right. So presumably he works every day, right? And yet there's dust right when he shows up, right? It just kind of shows everything about his environment includes neglect and decay. It's a place that sucks the life out of you, right? Um, and this is kind of, guys, one of the reasons that we check on each other in terms of, are you overworked? Guys, being overworked isn't just about working too many hours. It's kind of about the working conditions too, right? I mean, are you just being used as a cog in this machine, or is there any attention being paid to your health, right? The conditions of your work environment. So Winston has a bad cough, and maybe it's from cigarettes, but it might just as well be from working in an airless, dehumanizing office. This also connects kind of with the history of labor. The fight for better working conditions was never just about hours or pay, it was about the quality of the environment, right? You guys remember people fought for light, for fresh air, for safe equipment, for dignity. And George Orwell seems to be showing us the opposite, a work, a world where work conditions grind down both the body and the spirit. Guys, I deeply appreciate all of the super chats. I've demonetized this video so that you're not being overwhelmed with ads in the middle of this. So if you have it, if it's possible for you, definitely appreciate all the support of the channel if you can. And I will read the super chats after we're done with the chapter for sure. So continuing. In the walls of the cubicle, there were 3 orifices to the right of the speak right, a small pneumatic tube for written messages, to the left, a larger one for newspapers, and in the side wall, within easy reach of Winston's arm, a large oblong slit protected by wire grating. This last was for the disposal of waste paper. Similar slits existed in thousands or tens of thousands throughout the building, not only in every room, but at short intervals in every corridor. For some reason, they were nicknamed memory holes. When one knew that any document was due for destruction, or even when one saw a scrap of waste paper lying about, it was an automatic action to lift the flap of the nearest memory hole and drop it in. Whereupon it would be whirled away on a current of warm air to the enormous furnaces which were hidden somewhere in the recesses of the building. Winston examined the 4 slips of paper which he had unrolled. Each contained a message of only one or two lines, and the abbreviated jargon, not actually newspeak, but consisting largely of newspeak words, which was used in the ministry for internal purposes. They ran Times 17-3-84 BB speech malreported Africa rectify. Times 19-12-83 forecast 3YP fourth quarter 83 misprints verify current issue. Times 14-284 mini plenty malquoted chocolate rectify. Times 3-12-83 reporting BB day order double plus ungood refs unpersons rewrite fullwise upsup anti-filing. With a faint feeling of satisfaction. And guys, we're going to get into what all those meant, right? Orwell actually breaks it down for us in the chapter. So even though that kind of seemed like, what the heck does all that stuff mean? He's going to get into what Winston's job is concerning those four prompts. So we'll unpack it. Don't worry. With a faint feeling of satisfaction, Winston laid the fourth message aside. It was an intricate and responsible job, and had better be dealt with last. The other three were routine matters, though the second one would probably mean some tedious wading through lists of figures. Winston dialed back numbers on the telescreen and called for the appropriate issues of the Times, which slid out of the pneumonic tube after only a few minutes' delay. The messages he had received referred to articles or news items which, for one reason or another, it was thought necessary to alter, or, as the official phrase had it, to rectify. Hmm. Regarding um, his job, there's a book by Arthur Kessler called The 13th Tribe. He also wrote a book called The Ghost in the Machine. And he says in it that the danger of reducing people to mere cogs, right? He used the term holon. And what a holon is, it's the idea that we're both individuals and we're part of a greater whole, right? We're not just individuals. So that's the concept of a holon. Um, uh, Not only is this ink pen an individual pen, but it's also part of a greater system, like writing devices, things that you can write with. It doesn't even make sense on its own, right? Uh, so the the interesting component of that to me was that there are certain jobs that we work in that you can just tell that they're trying their best to treat you uh, like a screw or like a nail that needs to be properly hammered in, not taking into account your humanity. Um, so work should honor both sides of that truth. But in Oceana, what we're reading about, your individuality is erased and you're just kind of a replaceable gear. But I want to read one more line here for you that had to do with reason, right? It says the messages that he had received referred to articles or news items which, for one reason or another, it was thought necessary to alter, or as the official phrase had it, to rectify. So in this line, the message referred to articles which, for one reason or another, it was thought necessary to alter. The word reason is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. It sounds neutral, but it masks power, right? Who decides what counts as reason? I want you to know. Let me know in the chat right now if you agree with Nietzsche and David Hume. Right? They both reminded us that reason is not the master that we imagine it is. Reason is just a tool. Right? So they said reason is the slave of the passions. Hume wrote that. So the real question is, what passion, what master is this so-called reason serving? All right, let me know if you guys agree with that in the chat. Do you believe that reason is just, oh, we should just live by reason? Or do you think, well, wait a second, reason is the slave of the passions? You can use reason as a tool to accomplish terrible things. Do you agree? What do you think? Is reason a slave of the passions, or is reason always headed toward the good? Yeah. So I'm getting a lot of agreement with David Hume, right? Reason is a slave of the passions. Like I wanted my wife to marry me, and so I thought up reasons. I reasoned my way. I was like, okay, what am I supposed to do? I mean, how long do stalk her on Meetup, or like where do I find out? How do I message her? How do I get in? How do I meet her again? Right? I used reason. When I wake up in the morning and want to make breakfast, I was like, okay, what do I do first? Do I, feed the dog? Do this? So reason is just a tool. It's not a leader, right? Reason is the slave of the passions. So the real question is, what passion or what master is this so-called reason serving? Right? So in Orwell's world, reason doesn't serve truth. It serves control, right? For example, we continue. It appeared from the Times of the 17th of March that Big Brother, in his speech of the previous day, had predicted that the South Indian Front would remain quiet, but that a Eurasian offensive would shortly be launched in North Africa. As it happened, the Eurasian Higher Command had launched its offensive in South India and left North Africa alone. It was therefore necessary to rewrite a paragraph of Big Brother's speech in such a way as to make him predict the thing that had actually happened. Or again, the Times of the 19th of December had published the official forecasts of the output of various classes of consumption goods in the fourth quarter of 1983, which was also the sixth quarter of the ninth 3 year plan. Today's issue contained a statement of the actual output, from which it appeared that the forecasts were in every instance grossly wrong. Winston's job was to rectify the original figures by making them agree with the latter ones. So, guys, I have a couple of questions for you. And for some reason, I love questioning the chat just because I love to see the development of thought. There's like, or if there's one outlier. So, the first question I have for you regarding this: is it wrong to stay in a job when the work clashes with your values? Is it morally wrong to stay in a job when the work you do clashes with your values? Is it wrong? I'm getting two yeses that that's wrong. Someone says I've left jobs for that. Another person says I left my job for that. Yeah, see, and a lot of people say, okay, well, you know what? Look, I'm a my job is to be a healthcare professional and I work at McDonald's. And I think that McDonald's is terrible for your health, but hey, I have to support my family, right? I mean, there's some work that is just like, man, what I'm doing is just like soul sucking and I hate it and it doesn't align with my values at all. But I got to pay rent type of thing. Someone said necessary evil. Someone says it depends. Uh, so let me complicate the question a little bit. What if your family depends on it? Right? What if your family depends on that paycheck? Does that change your mind? Is it still morally wrong to stay at that job? No. So I got to know there. It's like maybe it's not wrong to stay at that job if you really need the money. Someone says family first. No, someone says yes. Right? So there's a little bit of difference there. So the final complication and the darkest of all, what if they'll kill you if you quit? Like, I mean, what if quitting the job means death? There are some who would say um, that, what was it? What was the quote? Something like, faith is the willingness to believe that whatever happens to you as the result of telling the truth is exactly what should happen to you. Right. And that gets dark, obviously. Um, so Orwell forces us to sit in that discomfort, right? So Winston's dilemma kind of mirrors our own. Survival often pulls against integrity, and that tension between what we know is right and what we must do to get by has the capacity to eat away at the soul, right? Um, and of course, 1984, is not as bad as it is, but it kind of mirrors how bad things could get if we let it. As for the third message, it referred to a very simple error, which could be set right in a couple of minutes. As short a time ago as February, the Ministry of Plenty had issued a promise, a categorical pledge, were the official words, that there would be no reduction of the chocolate ration during 1984. Actually, as Winston was aware, the chocolate ration was to be reduced from 30 grams to 20 at the end of the present week. All that was needed was to substitute for the original promise a warning that it would probably be necessary to reduce the ration at some time in April. As soon as Winston had dealt with each of these messages, he clipped his speak written corrections to the appropriate copy of the Times and pushed them into the mnemonic tube. Then, with a movement which was as nearly as possible unconscious, he crumpled up the original message and any notes that he himself had made and dropped them into the memory hole to be devoured by the flames. You know, Winston's job here, of kind of revisionism, historical revisionism, let's call it, it really does echo Stalin's purges. Where people weren't just killed, but they were erased from photos, encyclopedias, and memories. Like it wasn't enough to just execute someone, they had to kind of be unmade. The terrifying part is when lying kind of becomes routine paperwork, it no longer feels like lying. It's just kind of the job, right? I did a video, and I'm probably going to be uploading these kind of videos to my other channel called The Layman, just because I do a lot of reaction videos on this channel. I don't want to confuse the algorithm. But I did a video about lying and about whether we should use lying as a general purpose tool, because some people do. Some people are like, oh, so I'll just lie. If I want to get this, then that's just a part of my reasoning. It's egocentrically rational, right? I want to get what I want to get. So maybe lying is just something I can go to whenever I want. But that does have psychological effects. It can take a toll on you when you're just lying as a matter of course. Another thing before I move on, if you think of like the Third Reich, right? The railway officials who scheduled trains to go to Auschwitz, like they weren't stabbing anybody. They thought that they were just doing logistics, right? So bureaucracy has a capacity to make evil feel ordinary, right? And that's kind of the scary thing about this is that so many people have just forgotten they're doing anything wrong. It says what happened to the unseen labyrinth to which the pneumonic tubes led. He did not know in detail, but he did know in general terms. As soon as all the corrections which happened to be necessary in any particular number of the times had been assembled and collated, that number would be reprinted, the original copy would be destroyed, and the corrected copy placed on the files in its stead. This process of continuous alteration was applied not only to newspapers, but to books, periodicals, pamphlets, posters, leaflets, films, soundtracks, cartoons, photographs, to every kind of literature or documentation which might conceivably hold any political or ideological significance. Day by day and almost minute by minute, the past was brought up to date. That might be the most chilling line in the book so far. Day by day and almost minute by minute, the past was brought up to date. Guys, think of your favorite and leave this in the like let me know in the chat, who is your favorite villain or the most complicated villain you can think of in cinema or in literature? A villain that's complicated, that's not like one dimensional. And by a one dimensional villain, I mean, I know what it takes to kill this villain. It's very difficult, but I know what it takes. He's not very intercategorical, right? Right? Who's a really good villain? Thanos. Thanos is complicated, right? With a snap of his finger, he can like destroy a planet or something like that. I mean, I'm not an expert in the Marvel universe, but Thanos is definitely complicated. Somebody said Elon Musk. Oh, somebody said Elon Musk is a complicated villain. Oh, guys, look, Big Brother is not just an enemy out there. He's something that's inside you. So to fight him, you kind of have to fight yourself. That's kind of what makes him terrifying. Big Brother is invisible. His victims are invisible, right? He just kind of ghosts people. He deletes the past at every moment, right? So resistance becomes like punching fog. You hit yourself as much as you hit him, right? This is one of the most complicated and spooky antagonists in literature, right? Um, I mean, that's a lot. Someone who controls the past and your sense of identity, like he becomes something that you depend on, so that in order to fight against him, you have to you know, you have to be standing under a cascade of new insights in order to kind of undo what Big Brother has taught you thus far. That makes him a very, very complicated enemy. In this way, every prediction made by the party could be shown by documentary evidence to have been correct, nor was any item of news or any expression of opinion which conflicted with the needs of the moment ever allowed to remain on record. All history was a palimpsest, scraped clean and reinscribed exactly as often as was necessary. In no case would it have been possible, once the deed was done, to prove that any falsification had taken place. The largest section of the records department, far larger than the one in which Winston worked, consisted simply of persons whose duty it was to track down and collect all copies of books, newspapers, and other documents which had been superseded and were due for destruction. A number of the times, which might, because of the changes in political argument or mistaken prophecies uttered by Big Brother, have been rewritten a dozen times, still stood on the files bearing its original date, and no other copy existed to contradict it. Books also were recalled and rewritten again and again, and were invariably reissued, without any admission that any alteration had been made. Even the written instructions which Winston received, and which he invariably got rid of as soon as he had dealt with them, never stated or implied that any act of forgery was to be committed. Always the reference was to slips, errors, misprints, or misquotations, which it was necessary to put right in the interests of accuracy. But actually, he thought, as he readjusted the Ministry of Plenty's figures, it was not even forgery. It was merely the substitution of one piece of nonsense for another. Most of the material that you were dealing with had no connection with anything in the real world, not even the kind of connection that is contained in a direct lie. Statistics were just as much a fantasy in their original version as in their rectified version. A great deal of the time you were expected to make them up out of your head. So we're at a point now in the book where it's not enough to just obey Big Brother. You have to like constantly prove your loyalty, passing endless psychological tests. If you spot something in the times that makes him look weak, and by him I mean Big Brother, you're expected to correct it. And if no such weakness exists, sometimes you're pressured to just make something up. And I think Orwell is telling us this is kind of how tyranny seeps in. It's not just by force, but by teaching people to participate in their own oppression. And this kind of brings me back to Rin, right? Rin was, the artist that inspired us to create this book club community. And I love how Rin always puts in his music how we're kind of being taught to participate in our own oppression. You remember Money Game, the guy who has like the bag over his head, who's playing the guitar for the perpetrator? You know what I mean? Like Rin does it in symbols. But I mean, it's a historical echo as well, right? So I think it was during Mao's Cultural Revolution. People were expected to denounce their friends, their neighbors, even their family to prove their devotion to the party. So it wasn't about truth; it was about performance, right? Guys, one of the practices, because we always want to weave practices into these readings so that we're better off after the chapter than we were before. So one of the practices for today is see if you can build or find communities where truth is spoken even when it's uncomfortable, right? Because tyranny thrives when people stop speaking honestly with one another. For example, we continue. The Ministry of Plenty's forecast had estimated the output of books for the quarter at 145 million pairs. Sorry, boots, not books. The output of boots for the quarter at 145 million pairs. The actual output was given as 62 millions. Winston, however, in rewriting the forecast, marked the figure down to 57 million, so as to allow for the usual claim that the quota had been overfilled. In any case, 62 million was no nearer the truth than 57 million, or than 145 million. Very likely, no boots had been produced at all. Likelier still, nobody knew how many had been produced, much less cared. All one knew was that every quarter astronomical numbers of boots were produced on paper, while perhaps half the population of Oceania went barefoot. What does it remind you of? What does it remind you of? The lie that there's a surplus when in actuality there is impoverishment. What does it remind us of? A fake surplus, like the news saying we have a lot of it, when in reality, okay, we've got it. Maria's got it. Animal Farm, right? It was like, I always like I love the parallels, right? Remember, the animals are starving and they're sleepless, but then when people come to check out the farm, they'll put a bunch of hay, in this barrel, and then they'll put apples on top of the hay to make it look like the barrel is full, right? Um, Man, there's a lesson. There's a lesson about that in Orwell's work. The majority of them are going barefoot, and yet in the news they have they have plenty. I know that a lot of you feel like there's a simile or a similar situation in the news media today, where there is obvious lack and there's obvious um, problems with healthcare. There's obvious problems with housing, and yet that doesn't tend to be the focus, right? According to at least some news media. And I think we should really, at some point, go down to what these terms mean. Not words like Democrat and Republican, but words like liberal and conservative, because those ideas are both beautiful ideas, right? Democrat and Republican is just kind of party stuff. But I think that there's some integration that can be done with the former idea. But Winston glanced across the hall. In the corresponding cubicle, um, Winston glanced across the hall. In the corresponding cubicle on the other side, a small, precise looking, dark chinned man named Tillotson was working steadily away, with a folded newspaper on his knee, and his mouth very close to the mouthpiece of the speakwrite. He had the air of trying to keep what he was saying a secret between himself and the telescreen. He looked up, and his spectacles darted a hostile flash in Winston's direction. Winston hardly knew Tillotson and had no idea what work he was employed on. People in the records department did not readily talk about their jobs. Hmm. So that's just saying that there's no brainstorming allowed, there's no solidarity, and no allegiance. I want to go back to the boots really quick. So if half the people are barefoot, but the official line is there's a surplus of boots, your brain kind of gets pulled in two directions, doesn't it? It's like the perception is my feet are bare, but the propaganda says the boots are abundant. So this is kind of a cognitive dissonance at its most violent. And over time, it kind of leads to a learned helplessness where people stop trying to reconcile words with reality because the mental strain becomes unbearable. And so, in the Soviet Union, which both 1984 and Animal Farm harken back to, the citizens are starved in bread lines while the propaganda declared record harvests, right? So, in order to survive, people just learn to stop noticing. Does that make sense? In the long, windowless hall, with its double row of cubicles and its endless rustle of papers and hum of voices murmuring into speakrites, there were quite a dozen people with whom Winston did not even know by name, though he daily saw them hurrying to and fro in the corridors or gesticulating in the 2 minutes hate. He knew that in the cubicle next to him, the little woman with sandy hair toiled day in, day out, simply at tracking down and deleting from the press the names of people who had been vaporized and were therefore considered never to have existed. There was a certain fitness in this, since her own husband had been vaporized a couple of years earlier. That's so brutal. So there's this little woman whose job it is to track down and delete from the press the names of people who've been vaporized. And one of them is her own husband. So imagine working a job where you're forced to not remember that you ever had a husband, that he ever existed, right? Um, and just to kind of drive home the depth of this, right? The mental cog, like the mental cost of lying. Because I know we consider lying to be a trivial thing, but when lying kind of becomes constant, the brain has no free energy left. And I'm talking about the free energy principle, the neurologist Carl Friston. I think the free energy principle is like the paradigm of neuroscience today. So think about it. When you're lying, like if I'm lying to you, I have to track my own false story and I have to monitor your body language to make sure that you believe my lie. And I have to adjust on the fly so that I don't get caught, right? Studies show that lying burns up working memory, it spikes your stress hormones and reduces problem solving ability. So it literally makes you mentally weaker the more you do it. Am I saying that lying is not a tool that you should sometimes use to get you out of a really bad situation? No. I'm not saying that you should never, ever, ever use it. I'm just saying when a society or a social group is forcing you to lie and saying, hey, I want you to say something that is just clearly untrue. Remember the quote. I think the quote from the beginning of the book. Freedom is the ability to say 2 plus 2 equals 4. Right? When you're not allowed to say that anymore, you're already lost. right? So these are really, really important. Mandatory lying doesn't just control you externally, it breaks down your mind from the inside. A few cubicles away, a mild, ineffectual, dreamy creature named Ampleforth. Ampleforth is a crazy name. If I ever meet somebody named Ampleforth, okay. Dreamy creature named Ampleforth with if when I tell my daughter that there's someone named Ampleforth, she will die laughing. My 4-year-old can't handle crazy names. Uh a mild, ineffectual, dreamy creature named Ampleforth, with very hairy ears and a surprising talent for juggling with rhymes and meters, was engaged in producing garbled versions, definitive texts they were called, of poems which had become ideologically offensive, but which for one reason or another were to be retained in the anthologies. And this hall, with its 50 workers or thereabouts, was only one subsection, a single cell, as it were, in the huge complexity of the records department. Beyond, above, below, were other swarms of workers engaged in an unimaginable multitude of jobs. There were the huge printing shops with their sub editors, their typography experts, and their elaborately equipped studios for the faking of photographs. There were the teleprograms sections with its engineers, its producers, and its teams of actors, specially chosen for their skill in imitating voices. There were the armies of reference clerks whose job was simply to draw up lists of books and periodicals which were due for recall. There were the vast repositories where the corrected documents were stored and the hidden furnaces where the original copies were destroyed. And somehow or other, quite anonymous, there were the directing brains who coordinated the whole effort and laid down the lines of policy which made it necessary that this fragment of the past should be preserved, that one falsified and the other rubbed out of existence. Hmm. Guys, here's something else kind of spooky about this chapter. If you can't trust your eyes, you're essentially blind. If you can't trust your ears, you're essentially deaf. If you can't trust your memory, like guys, you got to think the ears and the eyes and the memory are all developed to keep you safe and to keep you alive. The nullifying of all of these things makes you a sheep almost literally. You have to be guided. You're being systematically taught not to trust what's right in front of your eyes anymore. And the records department, after all, was itself only a single branch of the Ministry of Truth, whose primary job was not to reconstruct the past, but to supply the citizens of Oceania with newspapers, films, textbooks, telescreen programs, plays, novels, with every conceivable kind of information, instruction, or entertainment, from a statue to a slogan, from a lyric poem to a biological treatise, and from a child's spelling book to a newspeak dictionary. And the ministry had not only to supply the multifarious needs of the party, but also to repeat the whole operation at a lower level for the benefit of the proletariat. So, the proletariat is a word that we're just getting introduced here in the book. And Orwell kind of divides society in two, the proles, and which are the majority. Um, they're uneducated, they're distracted, they are ignored, and they're poor. But they're also relatively free because they're not seen as a threat. The party members, however, and Winston is a party member, they live under total surveillance. They get access to some power, but only if they submit absolutely, totally, and completely. So that's kind of the difference between the proletariats and the party members. So it's a chilling trade. Your ignorance is traded for freedom or awareness in exchange for chains, however you want to call it. there was a whole chain of separate departments dealing with proletarian literature, right? So these are the little guys, these are the uneducated guys, the poor. Um, their music, their drama, their entertainment generally. Here were produced rubbishy newspapers containing almost nothing except sport, crime, and astrology, sensational 5-cent novelties, films oozing with sex, and sentimental songs which were composed entirely by mechanical means on a special kind of kaleidoscope known as a versifactor. No, versificator. There was even a whole subsection, pornosec, it was called in newspeak, engaged in producing the lowest kind of pornography, which was sent out in sealed packets, and which no party member other than those who worked on it was permitted to look at. So porn is for the proles and not for the party. Let me know in the chat why you think that pornography is being pushed to the undereducated, to the working class, to the poor. Why do you think that Orwell puts that in there? What is the, what power does it give? Joni says keeps them distracted. That's for sure. Distraction. And maybe, uh, you know, um, it's an outlet for testosterone, I guess. It's like it makes you a little bit weaker. Um, Desensitized, Kat said. That's a really good word for sure. As a distraction from what's actually going on. A lot of people saying distraction. Another reason is that pornography kind of short circuits maturity. I mean, think about in our ancestors' day, right? So we got to go back to like what we were evolved for. Um, uh, a long, long time ago, in a land far, far away, sex was a reward for development. Like in order to have access to sexual intercourse, you had to like, have a good name in the neighborhood. You had to have a good paying job. You had to have shown your ability to sacrifice. Delayed gratification was important. I mean, and so in order to achieve, you know, sexual intercourse, you had to have gone through some kind of development, right? And so giving people access to, because it's not immediate access, it's it's mediated through like a screen or through the magazine that you're looking at the porn in, right? Um, it's giving you something without doing the work. It's almost like where someone gets like muscle injections and they have like fake muscles. It's like you're not really strong. You just look strong, right? And I think that benefits the party, right? um, Removing the emotional maturity that's usually necessary to gain a true willing sexual partner, right? OnlyFans Orwell is crazy. I love this chat. Gigi says, or you had to look very, very good. I mean, but look, I mean, I think back in the day, looks weren't enough, but before the pill, I mean, sex was something that, you really had to, you had to gain trust. You had to have a pretty good name in the community. I mean, not in every single circumstance, obviously, but I think porn has the capacity to short circuit sexual maturity. It offers gratification without the work of a relationship, without any emotional depth. It kind of pacifies and it numbs, and it has the capacity to keep you docile. For Big Brother, porn is perfect. It zombifies the masses and it gives them release without rebellion, right? Appetite without intimacy. So the population is more or less distracted by hollow pleasure. And I love that everyone just said, like, right when I asked that question, it's just like, yeah, distraction, distraction. I completely agree. The population is distracted by hollow pleasures. And so they won't organize for real freedom, right? Three messages had slid out of the pneumonic tube while Winston was working, but they were simple matters, and he had disposed of them before the 2 minutes hate interrupted him. When the hate was over, he returned to his cubicle, took the Newspeak dictionary from the shelf, pushed the speak right to one side, cleaned his spectacles, and settled down to his main job of the morning. Winston's greatest pleasure in life was in his work. Most of it was a tedious routine, but included in it, there were also jobs so difficult and intricate that you could lose yourself in them, as in the depths of a mathematical problem. So, what's kind of bittersweet about this part is that um, there is some pleasure that he gets from his job, the intricacies of it. It says you could lose yourself in them, as in the depths of a mathematical problem. Um, so it says Winston's greatest pleasure in life was his work. Just for those who haven't been here when we've talked about the flow state, the best, and there's lots of different definitions in cognitive science for what the flow state is, but the best one that I've heard is a state where your competency barely exceeds the challenge. That's the flow state, right? If the challenge far exceeds your competency, that's stress. And if your competency far exceeds the challenge, that's boredom, right? So you don't want to be stressed, you don't want to be bored. Both of those are cognitively limited conditions. But when your competency just barely exceeds the challenge, then you have to stand under a cascade of insights, right? You're just like, "Oh, I'm constantly learning because I'm just barely at the edge of what I'm competent enough to overcome," right? And we love that feeling. That's the reason video games are so addictive, is because with every level, you're just barely at your competency's edge. Then the next level gets even harder. And so you're barely at the edge of your competency again, right? And so he feels like he's in the flow state when he's at this job. And it's a bittersweet thing because it's a job that, pacifies his community and is making for his own enslavement. But this is the part of his day that he enjoys the most. Delicate pieces of forgery in which you had nothing to guide you except your knowledge of the principles of Ingsoc and your estimate of what the party wanted you to say. Winston was good at this kind of thing. On occasion, he had even been entrusted with the rectification of the Times' leading articles, which were written entirely in newspeak. He unrolled the message that he'd set aside earlier. It ran, Times 3/12/83, reporting BB day order, double plus ungood, refs unpersons rewrite full wise, up sub anti filing. In old speak or standard English, this might be rendered thusly: the reporting of Big Brother's order for the day in the Times of December 3rd, 1983, is extremely unsatisfactory and makes references to non existent persons. Rewrite it in full and submit your draft to higher authority before filing. I'm going to read that again. In Old Speak or in Standard English, this is rendered as the reporting of Big Brother's order for the day in the Times of December 3rd, 1983, is extremely unsatisfactory and makes references to non existent persons. Rewrite in full and submit your draft to higher authority before filing. How close would you get to someone? How well would you get to know someone when their entire existence is dependent on their constant party allegiance, right? It's like, wouldn't you just make it? It's almost like life in Oceania would be easier if you just don't get to know anyone, right? Because the more you get to know them, the more complicated your life becomes, especially if they get vaporized, right? It's like, why would I invest a lot of memories in other people or make memories with other people if, you know, I'm going to have to then do the hard work of pretending they never existed if they cross the party line, right? It kind of puts you in a state where you don't want to get to know anybody. You just want to self isolate. Winston read through the offending article. Big Brother's order for the day, it seemed, had been chiefly devoted to praising the work of an organization known as FFCC, which supplied cigarettes and other comforts to the sailors in the floating fortress. A certain Comrade Withers, a prominent member of the inner party, had been singled out for special mention and awarded a decoration, the Order of Conspicuous Merit, second class. 3 months later, FFCC had suddenly been dissolved with no reasons given. One could assume that Withers and his associates were now in disgrace, but there had been no report of the matter in the press or on the telescreen. That was to be expected, since it was unusual for political offenders to be put on trial or even publicly denounced. The great purges involving thousands of people, with public trials of traitor and thought criminals who made abject confessions of their crimes and were afterwards executed, were special showpieces not occurring oftener than once in a couple of years. More commonly, people who had incurred the displeasure of the party simply disappeared and were never heard of again. One never had the smallest clue as to what had happened to them. Here in the margins, I wrote a question. Is the mystery scarier than the reality? It's like, I don't know which one is more disturbing, right? Like, I mean, what if when people broke the law, you just didn't see them? Would that make would that make people less likely to break the law or more? I mean, it's like because it seems like the mystery here is playing a big role, right? I mean, like, okay, I'm just gonna ask this question, and I'm sorry if this triggers anyone, but which one would you rather have happen? Your loved one is imprisoned for a year, and you know what prison they're at, or your loved one is kidnapped for a week, imprisoned for a year, or kidnapped for a week. And the only reason I ask that question is because for me, the mystery is what is so awful to me. As someone who's a father with a 4-year-old, the darkest regions of my mind are reserved for like my daughter being kidnapped or getting lost. I mean, we don't even have to say kidnapped, right? If somehow I lose track of her, like say we're at a festival or something. I don't know why me and my daughter would be at a festival, but say I just lose track of her and she's gone. And I go to police and days pass and they're like, yep, we're still looking. That to me would almost be worse than knowing something bad. I don't know whether that's selfish. I don't know, but unknown. Yeah. So there's people saying in the chat saying not knowing is murder. Someone says unknown is worse. Um, some people say prison. And so the question is, which one would you rather? Not knowing where your loved one is for a month, or knowing they're in prison for a year? And I mean, it's not a question you have to answer. I certainly struggle to answer it. It's not something that I don't even think that my mind will necessarily allow me to go there for a long period of time. It's just interesting that in this book, uncertainty, even uncertainty, is used as a political weapon. Someone is vaporized, they're just gone. You don't know where they went. You don't know if they're still alive or what's happening to them. That's part of the fear. Clad said there's a comfort in knowing even if it's bad. I completely agree. One never had the smallest clue as to what had happened to them. In some cases, they might not even be dead. Perhaps 30 people personally known to Winston, not counting his parents, had disappeared in one time or another. Winston stroked his nose gently with a paperclip. In the cubicle across the way, Comrade Tillotson was still crouching secretively over his speakwrite. He raised his head for a moment. Again, the hostile spectacle flash. Winston wondered whether Comrade Tillotson was engaged on the same job as himself. It was perfectly possible. So tricky a piece of work would never be entrusted to a single person. On the other hand, to turn it over to a committee would be to admit openly that an act of fabrication was taking place. Very likely, as many as a dozen people were now working away on rival versions of what Big Brother had actually said. And presently, some master brain in the inner party would select this version or that, would re edit it, and set in motion the complex process of cross referencing that would be required, and then the chosen lie would pass into the permanent records and become the truth. It's fascinating to me that those who are rewriting history in these departments are not allowed to work together. Even though it would be a lot more efficient if they did, it's almost like efficiency is sacrificed for secrecy, right? It's like the party is saying keeping it so that no one really knows each other and works together is better for us, even if the work is a little bit less efficient as a result. Winston did not know why Withers had been disgraced. Perhaps it was for corruption or incompetence. Perhaps Big Brother was merely getting rid of a too popular subordinate. Perhaps Withers, or someone close to him, had been suspected of heretical tendencies. Or perhaps, what was likeliest of all, the thing had simply happened because purges and vaporizations were a necessary part of the mechanics of government. That's really a scary phrase. Perhaps the thing had simply happened because purges and vaporizations were a necessary part of the mechanics of government. Have you guys ever seen the Netflix documentary 13th? I don't know whether it's still on Netflix. This was a couple of years ago that I saw the documentary 13th. It's about the 13th Amendment and about how freeing the slaves, uh, I think it's, some in the 13th Amendment, it said something like, you know, the United States will no longer keep slaves uh, except as a punishment for a crime, right? And that caveat was in the 13th Amendment, right? And so after the slaves were freed, they were criminalized at mass and were just, went into the prison system. And how, I guess the hypothesis of the show 13th is that this is kind of still happening throughout the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And it poses the question, was this system built to survive without free or extremely cheap labor? I mean, it keeps occurring, right? Where we find that large corporations or even the prison system, they just do this really, really cheap labor thing or sometimes free labor. And the question becomes, was this type of society even built to thrive without some kind of free work being done by this group of people who just work for free? Or is a group of slave-like people necessary to run this society? It's a scary thing to consider when it's like, yeah, we can't just get rid of the slaves. We have to, take them out of the public eye, put them behind bars, keep them working for free or ridiculously cheap. The only real clue lay in the words refs unpersons, which indicated that Withers was already dead. You could not invariably assume this to be the case when people were arrested. Sometimes they were released and allowed to remain at liberty for as much as a year or two before being executed. Very occasionally, some persons, whom you had believed dead long since, would make a ghostly reappearance at some public trial, where he would implicate hundreds of others by his testimony before vanishing, this time forever. That's interesting. So some of the people that they are just disappearing, some of these people show up again, and they just walk up on stage, somebody you haven't seen in years, and they're still alive, and they're just here to point at all the people that they know who should also be vaporized. So it's like some of these people are just taken to these psychological camps to have their minds messed with so that they could come back and just expose what's been done to them. And that serves as a caution against revolutionaries, right? Even the most bold heroes get broken. And Big Brother wants to show you that by bringing out those rebels and, you know, crazy. Withers, however, was already an unperson. He did not exist. He had never existed. Winston decided that it would not be enough simply to reverse the tendency of Big Brother's speech. It was better to make it deal with something totally unconnected with its original subject. He might turn the speech into the usual denunciation of traitors and thought criminals, but that was a too obvious. But that was a little too obvious. While to invent a victory at the front or some triumph of overproduction in the ninth 3-year plan might complicate the records too much. What was needed was a piece of pure fantasy. Suddenly, there sprang into his mind, ready made as it were, the image of a certain comrade Ogilvy, who had recently died in battle in heroic circumstances. There were occasions when Big Brother devoted his order for the day to commemorating some humble rank and file party member whose life and death he held up as an example worthy to be followed. Today, he should commemorate Comrade Ogilvy. It was true that there was no such person as Comrade Ogilvy, but a few lines of print and a couple of faked photographs would soon bring him into existence. Winston thought for a moment, then pulled the speak right toward him and began dictating in Big Brother's familiar style, a style at once military and pedantic. And because of a trick of asking questions and then promptly answering them, what lessons do we learn from this fact, comrades? The lessons which is alone one of the fundamental principles of ingsoc that, etc., etc., easy to imitate. At the age of 3, Comrade Ogilvy had refused all toys except a drum, a submachine gun, and a model helicopter. At 6, a year early, by a special relaxation of the rules, he had joined the spies. At 9, he had been a troop leader. At 11, he had denounced his uncle to the thought police after overhearing a conversation which appeared to him to have criminal tendencies. At 17, he had been a district organizer of the Junior Anti Sex League. At 19, he had designed a hand grenade, which had been adopted by the Ministry of Peace, and which, at its first trial, had killed 31 Eurasian prisoners in one burst. At 23, he had perished in action, pursued by enemy jet planes while flying over the Indian Ocean with important dispatches. He had weighed his body with his machine gun and leapt out of the helicopter into deep water, dispatches and all. An end, said Big Brother, which it was impossible to contemplate without feelings of envy. Big Brother added a few remarks on the purity and uh, single mindedness of Comrade Ogilvy's life. He was a total abstainer and a non smoker, had no recreations except a daily hour in the gymnasium, and had taken a vow of celibacy, believing marriage and the care of family to be an to be incompatible with a 24-hour a day devotion to duty. So, we now come face to face with opposing visions. Winston is writing about Big Brother's ideal servant, someone who, with at the blink of an eye, will sacrifice his own life. He's completely celibate because, marriage kind of gets in the way of 24-hour devotion to duty, right? Um, he, creates weapons and he's completely all in for Big Brother. And we see the ideal servant of Big Brother juxtaposed against Winston's ideal of himself. Remember, Winston has that dream where he's the ideal. He lives in the golden country. He admires a woman for her morality more than her sexuality, right? Remember, Julia throws off her clothes and offers herself to him, and he's more impressed with the moral gesture than the sexual advances. Completely opposing visions. And I love we kind of get this, Comrade Ogilvy. Um, and all he's writing is kind of the opposite of his own developing self. He had no subjects of conversation except the principles of Ingsoc, and no aim in life except the defeat of the Eurasian army, the defeat of the Eurasian enemy, and the hunting down of spies, saboteurs, thought criminals, and traitors generally. Winston debated with himself whether to award Comrade Ogilvy the Order of Conspicuous Merit, and in the end he decided against it because of the unnecessary cross referencing that it would entail. Once again he glanced at his rival in the opposite cubicle. Something seemed to tell him with certainty that Tillotson was busy on the same job as himself. There was no way of knowing whose version would finally be adopted, but he felt a profound conviction that it would be his own. Comrade Ogilvy, unimagined an hour ago, was now a fact. It struck him as curious that you could create dead men, but not living ones. Comrade Ogilvy, who had never existed in the present, now existed in the past. And when once the act of forgery was forgotten, he would exist just as authentically and upon the same evidence as Charlemagne or Julius Caesar. Yikes. That was chapter 4. Just an insight into the working situations of Winston. Are we ready for the ecology of practices? Mr. Biscuit speaks mugs. Get you a mug, get you a little mug. The first practice is to practice truth telling. Even in small ways, refuse to say what you know isn't true. Build the muscle of aligning your words with reality. And I know that that seems trivial. I mean, a part of us wants to say, "Oh, I already do that." Thank you so much for that super chat. I deeply appreciate it. And I'll get to all the super chats right after the practices here. um, but I mean, immediately when I ask you, when I say, even in small ways, refuse to say what you know isn't true, build the muscle of aligning your words with reality, right? Immediately you were just, there's a part of our ego that wants to take offense at that. Like, well, of course, I already do. I mean, I say what's real. I don't say anything that I don't believe. But really think about it. Is there ever a time where your cultural self is tyrannical over your rational self, where you're with a group of buddies who are saying something that you don't really believe, or they're behaving in a way that is against your rational self, right? Just practice the habit in small ways. Just refuse to say what you know isn't true. The second one, try your best to create humanizing work, right? Fight for conditions where people are treated as holons. Remember that word holon from Arthur Kessler? That you're both an individual and you're a part of a whole. So more and more work is just treating people as a part of the whole. You're a cog in this machine. You're just a number. We can easily replace you, right? And I think we should come together more often and say, hey, make sure that you're being treated as an individual too. Yeah, I understand that at a corporation, right, you have to kind of do, sacrifice, and you have to sometimes stay late hours in order, because you're a part of this bigger thing. But a holon is something that's both an individual, both recognized as an individual and part as a whole. You're not an expendable cog in the workplace, right? So that's what we want to create. The third thing, Guard against cognitive dissonance. So when official narratives clash with your lived experience, don't ignore that tension. Write it down, speak it out loud, keep reality alive. Because we're in a day and age right now where the narratives are so polarized that it's like, oh, okay. So you're trying to kind of gaslight all of us at the same time by saying that there are two versions of the real. This is one of the reasons I love this group, is because it's like, hey, when you really interact with a human being, you know that it's not true. It's like, so the people who sit in front of screens all day, who just watch the news, I get text messages. I'm not going to call the person out because I'm related to the person, but I get text messages all the time. It's like saying, "Oh, did you hear about this on the news? Did you hear about them? They're doing this and they're doing that." Listen, if you really sit down with people and you really look at them and you really dialogue with them, you'll realize they're really, really not as far apart as the media or the algorithm would have you think. So guard against cognitive dissonance. When official narratives clash with your lived experience, don't ignore that tension. Write it down, speak it out loud, keep the narrative alive. And the last thing is strengthen inner freedom. Strengthen your inner freedom. So, like, develop practices, and this is specifically if you feel intimidated expressing what you feel outwardly, because that might come with some consequences that you might not be emotionally prepared for. Don't traumatize yourself. When I say speak the truth, even if it's uncomfortable, I don't mean to do something that's going to get you in a fight. You know what I mean? So if you're not in a position, whether it's you got to cultivate some bravery or whatever, if you're not there yet, strengthen that inner freedom. Develop practices like journaling, meditating, or dialoguing with someone that you trust, and that'll help you stay mentally clear even when you're pressured to conform, right? Because these, totalitarianism, it starts by colonizing the mind, right? And so when you journal, and so, I mean, look at it. Winston's freedom started with a journal. He bought a journal and he started writing things in it. And then it just returned him to this mental clarity, right? So those are the 4 practices. Write them down if you want. Number 1 is practice telling the truth. Number 2 is create humanizing work and check on your family and friends. Is the work you're doing humanizing? The third one is guard against cognitive dissonance. And the fourth one is strengthen inner freedom, right? That's what we can learn from this particular chapter, right? And so every chapter that we do in the future is going to come with some practices that we can put in effect in our week, so that we're better than we were when we came in. Guys, thank you so much for being with me, for going on what is a dark but meaningful journey. And I want to get to the super chats. Let me see here. Thank you guys so much for the super chats. It helps more than you know. Insight members, legit. Um, Joanne, you're goated. I have no words. I'm just in awe and appreciation of you and everything that you've done for this channel. Maria, thank you so much for the 199 super chat. I deeply appreciate it. Kat says, glad to have you back this week. I'm glad to be back this week. My daughter just has an impressive ability to wait until your face is exposed and your mouth is open, to just go and just cough her sickness or her cold, and I was able to fight it off, but my wife wasn't. So I had to do errand duties the last time we were due to do 1984. But we will have this book club again Monday. So set your calendars. Next Monday, we will be doing this again and going into the 5th chapter. Roofs, thank you for the $6 super chat. Thank you so much. Nikki says, sorry I was late, but I'm grateful for the book club. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't be late again. You owe us all apples and milk. Joni, thank you so much. $20 super chat. That means everything. I always enjoy the discourses we have here. Me too. And it's going to get deep. I mean, it already is, but he's setting the stage for how to appropriately enact kind of a revolutionary mindset. And we'll talk about all of the different ways uh, to make that happen. Yes, yes, thank you. Like button. Anyone who hasn't hit the like button, and if you wouldn't mind, leave a comment, right? Not in here, but like after this shuts down, go into the, if you can, actually leave a comment in like the official comment section. All of those little things I'm starting to learn helps the algorithm. And I just pinned the Discord link. The Discord link has been pinned. All right, guys, let's head to the Discord for general discussion.